And, juxtaposed against that is, when we say, oh, Johns, right? Again, that's a different word that just kind of almost romanticizes these predators and these pedophiles. Pedophiles, these men that strategically will go in particular parts of the town, of the city, racially constructed parts of the town, city, to look for little girls. They are literally leaving their homes with their wife and their children and driving to different parts of the city where they know that they can find a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old girl, a 14-year-old girl, a 15-year-old girl that they can throw a couple of bucks at and rape and sexually exploit. But we call them dons. No, they're predators, they're pedophiles. So that's another piece to this whole discourse, is to put that in its true light as well. So you can see then, if you start to shift the discourse. So no, they're not prostitutes and whores or sex trade workers. They're just little girls. They're sexually exploited women. And no, he's not just a John who's, shy and this and that, which is just ridiculous. It's such a ridiculous justification for a man raping a woman. Oh, he's just socially awkward. Or he needs to get his rocks off. Like, give me a break. He's a predator. He's a pedophile. So you can see then that shifts the way people start to think about the issue. Instead of blaming the women and the girls who are victims in this, you really can assign blame to where it needs to be situated. The other piece, is that, like I said earlier, is that a lot of people will think that all of the women and girls that have gone missing are sexually exploited, and they're not. There's a wide spectrum across the country of women who have gone missing or murdered. Students, teachers, working, unemployed, mothers. I think almost 80% of the women, either it's 80 or 80%, 88% of all the women who have gone missing or murdered were mums and left children. All kinds of different demographics of the women that have gone missing or murdered. So it's not just sexually exploited women. It's not just women who put themselves in high-risk lifestyles. Just recently out of BC, so we had years and years where women were going missing and murdered. And again, the families kept saying, something's going on, something's going on. To where eventually Robert Pickton was arrested and is probably the most prolific serial killer that Canada has ever had. Just recently in December, the BC government had called a public inquiry several years back, and he just released his inquiry report. It's over 1,500 pages, and it's about, I don't know if it's 6 volumes, but it's like 7 books. It's just massive. And one of the things that he said, and I really appreciated this, and I really liked it, was he said these women don't, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said these women don't live high-risk lifestyles. These women are at risk because of the society in which they live. So clearly placing blame on society, that we don't create a space in which women and girls, particularly Aboriginal and racialized women and girls, are safe. It's not their fault. We are not creating a public space where they are safe. So I really appreciated that he did that, because then he again did a discourse shift, right? He deconstructed that whole stupid notion of high-risk lifestyle, which just annoys the crap out of me. The other piece that I think is really important to understand about missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls is that it is fundamentally entrenched in our history as First Nations people, as Métis people, as Inuit people in this country, and that colonial relationship that we have with the settler population. And I mean, I can go on and on and on in respect of the whole historical piece on Aboriginal women and their identity and their space and their place within pre-contact society and then after contact. But what I'll say is that when newcomers came here in the form of explorers, missionaries, whatever, there are a myriad of people that came over here, all in search of wealth and colonizing and imperialism and Christianizing, all of those people that came over in search of that. They didn't understand what they were seeing. They didn't understand Indigenous women as equal members of that particular community, of that particular tribe. They didn't understand Indigenous women as having equitable capacity in making decisions for the community. They didn't understand Indigenous women as having control over their sexuality. Or they didn't understand Indigenous women as autonomous beings. They weren't dependent on their men were not dependent on them. It was an equitable space. It was an equitable relationship. They didn't understand that because what they knew was all that they knew back in whatever particular motherland they came from, which was women were subservient to their husbands. They were the property of their fathers and then to their husbands. They were to be seen and not heard. They're there just for their men's sexual enjoyment. They're to procreate. All of these things that our women weren't. Which it would be the same if we went there. We wouldn't understand what we were seeing either. Like, why are these women so submissive and all of this stuff? And what they did then was they many people don't realize that all these newcomers, these travelers, these voyageurs, these missionaries, they had to write in journals everything that they saw. They had to record what they saw. And then they would send those journals back to England, Spain, France, wherever they came from. And they would record in these journals their interpretation of what they saw. And those journals inform then what every other settler who came here thought they understood about Indigenous people. So for Aboriginal women, Indigenous women, I could give you countless quotes about how, Indigenous women were the slaves to their husbands. Women's roles were essentially the drudgery of a savage life. These comments, these socially constructed narratives, is what informed and continues to inform Euro-Canadians. So when you fast forward to today, or the last 30 years, 40 years, however you want to calculate it, that social construction of Aboriginal women and girls as less than, as savage, as promiscuous, as all of these things less than, have its foundation in the very beginning of our colonial history, so that it still follows us today. And I illustrate that by there's two things that you can kind of illustrate that point. One is, across the country for many, many, many years, again, that has shifted now, but for many, many years, the inaction from policing institutions. Because basically Aboriginal women and girls, like, what can you expect? They put themselves at risk. They do those things. There's not much more you can expect. That's the mentality. Again, that shifted now. That shifted because of the Opal Inquiry. It's shifted because Aboriginal women's organizations and family members and activists have demanded that Aboriginal women and girls, their files, their cases are afforded the same police resources as everybody else. And policing institutions, some of the ones that I work with, I know have really shifted the way they do work. But another way to illustrate that point about, how, history informed even today was back in June 2011, so only a couple of years ago, when we were doing our mural, our Never Forgotten mural on Portage. So heading west on Portage Avenue, under the CP rail, we have two memorial or murals. On this side is those women that have been missing, and on this side, those women that have been murdered. So every day I would go, or every couple of days I would go and just check up on the artist. His name was Tom. And one day I came there and he was standing on the, what's that called? Ladder. Because it's massive, right? So I said, Tom, and he goes, oh, hi, and he looks like he's really mad, and he comes down to his ladder, and he says, oh, Nahanni, he says, I'm just so mad. He says, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what's wrong? And he said, well, there was a young non-Aboriginal man that was on his bike and stopped and asked me what I was doing. He says, and so I explained to him that I was, doing this mural dedicated to Aboriginal missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. And that young white man said to Tom, only 2 years ago, said, oh, well, those effing whores deserve what they got. So he went on to explain, but Tom was really, really upset. But you can see how that discourse and that way Indigenous women and girls have been socially constructed still follow us through to today. So I guess what I'll do is I'll just share a little bit about what, there's a variety of different things that have gone on across the country. But, every year across the country, there's at least 2 gatherings, vigils, memorials for Aboriginal women and girls. The first of the year would be February 14th, memorial for missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. That goes on across the country. I think some of the biggest are in BC. But again, that's just in memory of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls that we go and we walk and we just honor them, and then there's speeches. But that's all across the country. And then October 4th, that was Sisters in Spirit Memorial, which is another day that we all gather to remember missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. In Manitoba, we have the Mother's Day March. The sister of Claudette Osborne, who's been missing almost for 5 years now. Her name is Bernadette Smith. Every year she puts on a concert. It's called No Stones Unturned. We have that. So you see that across the country, the public, the Aboriginal community, led by the Aboriginal community, but in partnership and in solidarity with the community, have, really kind of commanded space to remember these missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls across the country. Kind of demanding and reclaiming that space so that they're not just forgotten, right? They lived here. They were here. Their spirits remain with us. Even in my own work, these are some of the photos that I keep with me. These photos are up here every day, just so that I can honor these women and girls and know, and so that people, when they come into my office, know that these women existed and that they were loved and they were cherished and they left children and they deserve to be acknowledged and honored. For Manitoba, we've done a lot of work in this issue. In fact, my position is one of the only positions across Canada like this, that the government appointed this particular person to advise them on Aboriginal women's issues, particularly missing and murdered. We have a strategy on missing and murdered. We're one of the only jurisdictions that actually have a bona fide strategy on missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. And, a lot of that was some public awareness. So I'm not sure if you had seen that What If She Was Your Daughter campaign. That was the work that we did in our strategy. We held a provincial summit. And every year we put on a gathering for families, and it's called Wiping Away the Tears. So Wiping Away the Tears is actually a ceremony when you've lost a loved one. And so every year we put on a gathering, a family gathering for families of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. And this year, it's always in the summer. And every year, which is tragic in many sense, I have more and more people come. So some of it is that I'm just connecting with some of the other families that I haven't met before, and they're attending. But then some of them are just families that are new families, meaning there's a new woman or girl that's gone missing or murdered. And it's something that I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of, out of all the work that I do, I'm really proud of, proud of all the work that I do, but I really love the Wiping Away the Tears gathering because it gives families an opportunity just for a couple of days to connect with one another, where they're in a space with other families that understand their very unique trauma, their very unique daily realities that other people wouldn't understand if you haven't had a loved one murdered or a loved one missing. And it's an opportunity just to, they all stay at the hotel. They're fed so well. I'm obsessed with feeding everybody, so I always have lots and lots of food. And, everybody brings their kids. So the kids, small kids, like one woman who's been missing, her kids, I've seen them grow up. And they come every year. And so even the kids get some time where they can just, they play and they go swimming. And so, I know that hasn't been done across the country. In fact, I had somebody just come visit me maybe about 6 months ago, asking what we do, kind of as a best practice. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, in this whole context, that there is this issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls across the country. That things have changed, that there's always more work to be done, right? And at the end of the day, that everybody's ultimate goal is that no more women and girls go missing. Everybody's goal is that there are no more women or girls or boys, who are sexually exploited on the streets. Our ultimate goal is that there's no more violence against Aboriginal women and girls, and that women can just live safe. Girls can grow up to be whatever they want to be, and that women can be safe. And women can be safe raising their children, and women can be whatever they want to be. I think that that's the ultimate goal that we all work towards, and we all should work towards. And finally, that and I've said this time and time again, I sound like a broken record, but that this is not an Aboriginal woman's issue. It's not an Aboriginal issue. This is all of our issue. It's my issue as a mum. It's my issue as a woman. It's my issue as a First Nations person. It's my issue as a Canadian. It's my issue just because I'm human. And just because these women and these girls are human. And that's what connects us. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what you do. But that's what connects us to this issue. And everybody has a responsibility to get on board, to do whatever they can do. Even if it's just the smallest thing, everybody has the responsibility to do that.